You're listening to the Wealth Rituals podcast, and I'm your host, Michelle Pava. There's a particular kind of financial advice that sounds very reasonable, but it often fails people. It tells you to create a budget, automate your savings, stop buying things that you don't really need, don't buy that coffee, and then just repeat that behavior for 30 days or 6 weeks or 21 days or whatever the guru tells you until it becomes a habit. And then when that doesn't work, what happens? You blame yourself, right? You decide that you are the one that lacks discipline, or your partner decides that you're irresponsible, or you think that your partner's irresponsible. Or maybe your family may label you as the spender or the avoider, or maybe you're thinking that someone in your family can't be trusted with money. But what if the problem is not simply that you just haven't found the right budgeting plan or budgeting app or budgeting workbook or whatever? What if it's really your nervous system? Maybe your nervous system is having difficulty tolerating the emotional distance between what feels good now and what might make you feel like you want to protect your future. So today we are going to talk about that very thing, serotonin and money. Not because serotonin is the single explanation for spending, saving, or financial anxiety. It isn't. But human behavior is much more complex than just one neurotransmitter or one budgeting app. Get my drift here? Serotonin is involved in several processes that matter, and they matter tremendously to financial behavior, to patience, to impulse regulation, learning from experience, responding to uncertainty, adapting after disappointment, and tolerating the wait for a future reward. So, in other words, serotonin may affect some of the exact capacities that we expect people to use when managing money. And yet, we rarely discuss this biology underneath those expectations, or the psychology under them. Welcome to Wealth Rituals. I'm Michelle Pava, and this is where we look at wealth not simply as a collection of numbers, but as something shaped by the brain, our body, our relationships, and our lived experiences. So let's just begin by clearing up one big misconception about serotonin. And when I worked in trauma therapy, when I worked in that area, I often had people that thought that they just needed more serotonin or to just do something that would make them happy. Then they would get serotonin and suddenly life would be great. That's what they wanted. And then they were always surprised when they would do the fun thing and then the next day life was the same again. So serotonin is frequently described as the happiness chemical. And that description is catchy, but scientifically, it's a little too simplified. So serotonin is a signaling molecule. It participates in mood, certainty, but it also involves sleep, appetite, digestion, learning, behavioral inhibition, sensitivity to reward and punishment, and our ability to adapt to changing circumstances. There is also no single serotonin dial in the body that simply moves from sad to happy. And that's why a lot of those endeavors don't really work when someone is saying, well, I'm going to do this one thing. It makes me happy. I'll release serotonin and then I'll just move it on from there. It doesn't really work that way. And we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about how it affects money as well and your budget. So I want you to think of serotonin not just as a signaling molecule. And again, we already talked about sleep and appetite and everything, but we need serotonin for all of that. And we also need those things for serotonin. It's a cycle. So think of an infinity circle, or excuse me, an infinity sign. And on one end is serotonin, and on the other end is sleep, appetite, digestion, and all the things. So there's no one single serotonin dial in the body, and it doesn't go from just sad to happy in that little infinity sign, right? I want you to picture that, and I want you to picture that serotonin goes up and down in that infinity sign, but it is not just flowing within us, it needs either cells or neurons. So different serotonin pathways and receptors can have different and sometimes oddly opposing effects. So it's better to think of serotonin as more like the body's regulatory space. It helps different systems communicate and adjust. And I know right now you're thinking, why are we just talking about serotonin? I want to talk about money. Hear me out on this, okay? So you may have heard that most of the serotonin is produced in the gut, and that is true. But this is where we need an important distinction. The serotonin that is made in the gut does not simply travel right to the brain and become brain serotonin. Serotonin generally does not cross the blood-brain barrier. The gut and the brain have largely separate serotonin systems. I can't even talk today. And the gut serotonin is very much involved in digestion, intestinal movement, blood vessels, even platelets, and communication throughout the body, which is kind of amazing, right? That happens. And then we have the brain serotonin, and that is more synthesized inside of the brain, obviously, from tryptophan. And that is an amino acid that we obtain through food. So the gut can still influence the brain, but the relationship is indirect and very complex. And I know, again, you're thinking, why are we talking about this? But please stay with me on this, because when I bring it together, it's going to make so much sense. So the gut microbiome, the immune system, the vagus nerve, stress hormones, inflammation, and the availability and metabolism of tryptophan can all participate in gut-brain communication. So, eating one so-called, serotonin boosting food is not the same as delivering serotonin to the brain. And producing serotonin is not the entire story. And this is where it gets really interesting here for your budget, for your financial wellness, and for wealth rituals that you infuse throughout your life. So it must be synthesized, released, and received by the appropriate receptors, cleared or recycled, and coordinated with many other systems, including dopamine, cortisol, sleep-wake hormones, and different autonomic nervous system reflexes, I'll call it. And this is what people are often trying to describe when they talk about serotonin modulation. So everything that I just mentioned is the modulation. It's how things work in connection to each other. So just having serotonin, coursing throughout your body isn't enough. It has to modulate. So it's not simply just about how much serotonin exists, right? It's about how effectively the larger system is regulating and responding. Now, here we finally talk about money. How does this have to do with money? Think about what saving requires. Saving money means giving up, to some degree, some kind of pleasure, comfort, relief, or possibility today in exchange for a benefit that may not arrive for months, years, or even decades. That is an enormous neurological request. The present reward is vivid. You can see it, you can touch it, you can order it, you can eat it, you can wear it, you can experience it today, especially through Amazon, right? We're online, we're on TikTok Shop, Instagram, there's ads thrown at us all of the time, much more now than when I was younger. So I'm 59 at this recording. When I was in my teens and my 20s and even in my 30s, there was not so much temptation around to purchase or to not save. So I want you to think of retirement right now. Retirement is very abstract. Even for someone in my age range, a lot of people have a hard time with understanding retirement. An emergency fund is very abstract. Paying off a debt 6 months from now seems abstract. The feeling of security that comes with having money available in the future can be difficult for the brain to emotionally experience in the present. And as I'm saying this right now, I kind of have my hands up at my head, and I want you just to imagine that you're just sort of like, you're trying to think of it. You're trying to figure out, what does it feel like to be me in the future? What is future me feeling? And that can be really hard. We could have wishful thinking, but that is not the same as bringing in something abstract and feeling like there's a reward there. And it's not just willpower. And research has even connected serotonin signaling with waiting for delayed rewards, responding to adverse outcomes, behavioral flexibility, and even certain forms of impulse regulation, i.e., temptation, right? So this does not mean that every impulsive purchase is caused by low serotonin, but it does mean that the ability to pause, tolerate discomfort, and remain oriented toward a future reward is partially a biological capacity, not just a moral virtue. This is why it's so important for you to not shame yourself, not blame yourself, because it might not be something that's really your fault. It could be biology that you're working against and you're trying to work with, but it could be really hard. So the change is that the conversation is now more about your biology. It's not about shaming you. It's not about blaming you. And if you're someone who's looking at someone else, it might be time to take a step back and think, do they have enough modulated serotonin? Now, I don't want you to armchair diagnose anyone else, so really just focus on you right now. So if someone is chronically stressed, sleeping poorly, socially isolated, undernourished, depressed, overwhelmed, anxious, living in a state of threat, it might be so much harder for that person to make consistent, future-oriented financial decisions. And it's not because they don't care about their future, right? I mean, it's because their system might be prioritizing immediate regulation. Think of it as survival. If you're in survival mode, you're probably going to spend for today because you're in survival mode. If you're an anxious, stressed person, if you're in a really bad marriage, you might have a harder time keeping money in savings. And especially for people that are in really bad situations where they need to save, it can be extremely hard for them to save. So when your system is prioritizing immediate regulation, it is especially important when we focus on discussing emotional spending, because an emotional purchase is not always about wanting that object. How many times have you maybe purchased something and it just sits somewhere, sits in the garage, sits somewhere, or you buy it, you love it, and then the novelty wears off? So when someone is like that, they want the stimulation, they want the relief, they want the comfort, they want the novelty, the control, the hope, the identity, a reward after a painful day, a way to feel cared for when they do not feel cared for anywhere else. That often does happen. In fact, I remember looking at a study of different home shopping networks, and many of the shoppers were single, older women who felt very isolated. And they had garages full of a bunch of things that they didn't really need. And they felt like they knew the hosts as well. They felt like these were comforting, familiar faces coming into their living room. So anyway, from the outside, all of that can really look irrational, right? The purchase might be a temporary change in how the person feels, even when they know it's going to create stress later. So inside of the nervous system, however, The behavior may be a clear function that something hurts, right? And the brain has learned that purchasing creates a rapid interruption. I want you to think of it as purchasing something might be a band-aid on something that needs an emotional operation. Think of it that way. And that is why shame is such a poor financial intervention. Shame does not teach anyone how the nervous system should tolerate discomfort. It does not improve sleep. It does not reduce isolation. In fact, it makes it even worse. It doesn't resolve trauma. In fact, it can create more trauma, and it also doesn't create a meaningful future reward. So when you're shaming yourself or someone else, expect it to get worse, in other words, right? So in many cases, shame also adds just another painful state that the person will then try to escape because they need to put that band-aid on something that's really painful. And so spending can do that. And the spending isn't always like flamboyant spending, you know? Sometimes it's spending money on your business or spending money on clothes because you think you need certain clothes for your career. I mean, it really runs the gamut. And also spending for other people is another thing that happens as well. So that escape though, when someone feels like they escape through that same behavior which they were shamed in, creates a cycle. And this is how a spending and shame cycle develops. You feel depleted or you feel distressed in some way. Then you buy something to change that feeling. You don't consciously always know that you're doing it, by the way. The purchase brings temporary relief or anticipation. You have something to look forward to. Something is going to arrive. But then the guilt arrives and you criticize yourself or hide what you spent. The shame increases. The stress and disconnect also increase. And then eventually you need relief again. If this sounds a lot like addiction, you're absolutely right. It can be very addicting to be in this situation, and spending can be an addiction. So the purchase was really not the entire problem. It was actually part of the regulatory loop. So we can see similar loops with financial avoidance. Someone may know that they need to open a bill, look at a bank balance, or call a creditor, or even look at their retirement account. But then the task creates an immediate stress response that avoidance then provides a relief to. That band-aid again, right? Avoidance is rewarding because it removes the discomfort, even though it makes the financial situation worse later. So it's not like people are walking around thinking, oh, I'm going to avoid it and everything is going to be great. They know it's going to be worse later, but they can't handle the pain in the moment. And you see this a lot in addiction as well. And again, this is not simply a knowledge problem. It's not that you don't have access to how to budget, especially being online, right? So the person or you may understand perfectly well what needs to be done. But the difficulty is tolerating the emotional experience required to do it. This is why the idea that a habit becomes an automatic thing after 30 days or 21 days or whatever other magical number can be so misleading, because it's not just about behavioral repetition. It's because habits really do not develop in a vacuum, right? It needs to have, the behavior needs to be in, how do I put this? The behavior needs for you to be rested, connected, emotionally regulated, and it may also become impossible to do if you're grieving or sleep deprived or frightened or living in a chronic conflict. That's why so many people are in these cycles of not living their best life at all and being broke because they can't get out of that loop. It's not because they want to be there. It's because they biologically cannot get out of that loop. And a financial habit is not a permanent space simply because you repeated it for a certain number of days. So, like if you decide that you're not going to spend anything on, I don't know, Amazon or TikTok Shop or whatever for, say, 6 weeks. At the end of the 6 weeks, yeah, you kind of went through your own Lent or your own challenge, but that doesn't mean you've actually changed a behavior. It just means that for those days you change the behavior. It still exists inside of your nervous system. So this is why couples can be very cruel to each other when it comes to money, because one person may regulate with anxiety by saving and monitoring every number. And then the other person may regulate distress by spending, avoiding, or trying to create pleasant experiences. And a lot of the couples that I have seen throughout my career do fit into that dynamic. One is a saver, one is a spender, but the saver is extremely anxious, and the spender is also anxious, but they're avoidant. And it doesn't mean that they don't love each other. It doesn't mean that they're doing this to hurt each other. One is not controlling and one is not immature and impulsive. It's just their actual systems, their nervous systems. So both people may believe that they are responding to the other's character, and the saver may say, you don't care about the future. And the spender may say, you're controlling me and preventing us from living well. But underneath the conflict, both people may be attempting to create safety in different ways. One seeks safety through accumulation and control. The other seeks safety through comfort, freedom, or immediate relief. Neither person is helped by being reduced to a financial stereotype. And I really don't like financial stereotypes. This does not mean that we remove responsibility, though. This is so important to bring up. Biology is not destiny, and understanding a behavior is not the same as excusing every consequence. But responsibility works better when it is paired with accurate information. If your financial behavior is partly serving a regulatory function, the answer is not to simply rip the Band-Aid or the behavior away. You need to understand what it has been doing for you and build additional ways to meet that need. Does that make sense? What we need to do is bring up a very practical question. What can you do? Well, the first step is treating financial difficulty as an isolated compartment of your life. You don't want to do that. It's not. Your financial difficulty is in every area of your life, even the areas that you think are completely separate. So when I work with people around money, I want to know, how are they sleeping? How are they eating? How are you moving your body? Do you get outside? Do you have a good relationship where you feel safe and supported? Do you have a relationship where you can be open and have a conversation with that person about money? And you would be surprised at how many people do not have money conversations with their partners even. And people are sometimes really surprised by these questions, but they expect financial work to begin and end with just numbers. And some people, especially those who work in finance, and believe it or not, a lot of people who work in finance actually struggle with finance themselves. They are thinking it has to all be about money. Like, okay, well, what's the budget? What are you going to set me up with? And when I start asking them questions, they get very uncomfortable. So it's not unusual also, as I'm saying this, for you to feel uncomfortable, because you have to take a very hard look at your life and where is it working? Where is it not working? And please, when it comes to sleep, I don't want to hear I'm a night owl. That's great, as long as you can sleep till noon the next day. But you need to have a sleeping pattern that supports your health. And you will probably find that people that are not sleeping enough or not moving enough, there's other things that are layered on top of what's happening with them. And I might be talking about you or someone that you know, that, maybe they're not sleeping well, but they think they're a night owl, but they also have weight that they can't lose. And they also have a short, kind of a short fuse for certain types of people. They're impatient. It just goes on and on. And all of that ties into how you look at money. So, you have to understand that you might feel surprised or uncomfortable with these questions, but financial work does not begin and end with numbers. But the brain making your financial decisions is housed inside the same body that is sleeping 4 hours a night, or skipping meals, or eating junk food, or living under stress, or feeling chronically alone. You cannot completely separate financial regulation from physiological and emotional regulation. So the next thing I do is I build a pause before the financial behavior, but I make the pause supportive rather than punitive. I'm not going to blame someone or punish them. So before making an unplanned purchase, ask yourself, what am I hoping that this purchase will change inside of me? Now, I don't care if you're just buying something for someone else, you still have to ask that question. Maybe the answer is boredom. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe you want to feel attractive, loved, rewarded, hopeful, or you want to be seen as successful. You are not trying to prosecute yourself. You're gathering information. You really need to gather this information. You need to self-talk. You need to slow down your purchases enough to have the self-talk. Believe it or not, so many people have a hard time doing that. And then you have to think, is there another way to create even 10% of that feeling before I decide to purchase? So I'm not saying not instead of buying it forever. I mean, just before you decide in that moment. I want you to take a walk, eat if you haven't eaten, text someone safe, sit outside, take a shower, save the item and revisit it the next day, move money into a savings account and see whether that action creates a different reward. The goal is to widen the space between the feeling and the financial response. The third thing I do is I make sure that we talk about future rewards with more emotional visibility. Telling yourself just save for retirement may not be neurologically compelling. It's too remote for some people. It's too abstract for some people. Give the money a concrete identity. This is my 6-month breathing room fund. That's what I want you to think. Or this is the money that allows me to leave an unhealthy workplace. Or this is the fund that means car repair will be only inconvenient rather than catastrophic. This is the money that protects the older version of me. This is what I want my retirement to look like. This is what I want to travel, or I want to be healthy, or I want to hike every day. This is what I need for the hobbies that I want to have when I retire, and even maybe in the next 2-3 years. So savings will become easier when the future stops feeling like a vague deprivation and it starts feeling like a relationship with someone you care about, your future self. And a lot of people get choked up because a lot of people don't even love themselves enough to save money now. They can't even imagine it in the future. Fourth, I want you to create frequent evidence of success. If the only financial reward is supposed to arrive 20 years from now, you may not feel engaged in it, and your nervous system may not. So I need you to notice the milestones. Track your first $100. Acknowledge the first week in which you looked at your accounts without avoiding them. Celebrate paying a bill on time. Now, some of you guys are living on trust funds and you still have anxiety. You still need to find those milestones of what can I do to not have this anxiety. This does not mean spending your entire accomplishment as a reward or blowing everything. It means allowing your brain to register that the behavior produced something valuable. And pretty much lastly, what I do is I reduce unnecessary cognitive and emotional demands, meaning automation can help, but not because automation makes you a better person. It just reduces the number of moments in which you're stressed, that your brain has to choose something, that your brain has to make the choice between an immediate reward and a future one. So the more you take away those choices and automate, the easier it is for your nervous system. Use automated transfers, separate savings accounts, waiting periods, spending alerts, and remove the friction around financial behaviors that you want to reduce. It's really that simple. At the same time, make beneficial behaviors easier. So the point is not to prove that you had a perfect week of self-control. The point is to create an environment that supports the decisions that you want to make and take significant changes in mood, impulse control, or behavior seriously. If spending feels compulsive, sudden changes, or accompanies periods of unusually elevated energy or very little need for sleep, that deserves professional attention. Financial behavior can sometimes be a visible part of a larger medical or mental health issue. There is no shame in being evaluated. So, what do I want you to take from this episode? I don't want you to walk away feeling that every financial struggle is a serotonin problem, number one. But I do want you to understand that financial behavior is embodied behavior. The ability to wait and plan and tolerate discomfort and recover from disappointment and remain connected to a future goal depends much more than just willpower. It depends on the condition of you entirely. So if you keep failing at, or in your eyes, failing at a financial habit, don't immediately ask, what's wrong with me? I want you to instead say, where am I when this happens? What state am I in? What need is this fulfilling for me? What does this future feel like? Why does it feel so unreachable? Maybe what would help my body feel safe enough to choose differently? What ritual could support that choice? Not only for 30 perfect days or whatever, but really around changing the conditions of my day-to-day life so I don't have to do challenges. Wealth is not created through shame. It is created by building the capacity to care for yourself today while protecting the person you are becoming. This is a wealth ritual. I'm Michelle Pava, and this has been Wealth Rituals. And if this episode has helped you and your financial behavior differently in any way, shape, or form, share it with someone who has been blaming themselves too much, or maybe even blaming someone they love for struggling with money. Until next time, remember that understanding your behavior does not remove your power. It gives you something and somewhere more intelligent to begin. You can always reach me at my website, wealthrituals.org, and you can reach me there. I have plenty of free resources, including a free monthly book club.